The London sky this afternoon does not carry the blue of hope, but is shrouded in a heavy, leaden gray, as if the very air itself is bleeding. At Kensington Palace, the symbol of solemnity and perfect diplomatic smiles, a message has just been broadcast that has caused the entire United Kingdom and the world to hold its breath. Prince William, the heir to the throne, the man who always maintains a steel-like demeanor, appeared before the cameras with an appearance that left everyone in total shock. His eyes were red-rimmed, etched with the bloodshot veins of many sleepless nights, and his voice, usually so steady, trembled like a violin string on the verge of snapping. He did not read a dry press release polished by sophisticated media advisors. He was speaking from the heart of a husband who very nearly lost everything. William confirmed Princess Kate's true condition in an update he described as heart-wrenching, a confession that the truth about her recovery is far more brutal and dangerous than anything the palace machine had tried to cover up for months. We have lived in a heavy silence for months, a silence labeled as privacy. But today, William decided to smash that mask. He admitted that Kate was not simply recovering from routine surgery. She has been facing a life-and-death struggle in the shadows, where the line between life and death was so thin that a single soft breath could have made it vanish. Look deeply at the wrinkles newly carved into William's forehead. Those are not just signs of time. They are a physical map of extreme tension and the secret fear of facing a future without the woman who is the soul of this monarchy. Every word William uttered was like a knife cutting through the perfect shell of the institution. This was no longer a routine health update. It was a painful confession. A monarchy that has always wanted to control reality has finally had to bow before human vulnerability. Why did it take this long? Why was the truth only dragged out at the last possible moment? Behind those cold stone walls, a fierce battle raged between the duty to protect the institution and the public's right to know. William chose Kate. He chose honest vulnerability over polished lies. And when he spoke of recovery, it was not a glorious victory, but the profound sigh of relief of a man who had just walked out of hell. People can see the age spots or the sallow complexion on the faces of the royals in recent photos. That is not just aging. It is evidence that the monarchy's vascular system is clogged with secrets that are far too heavy. Kate has fought not only for her life but to keep the soul of this family from being swallowed by the decay of archaic rules. Tonight, the truth has spoken, and nothing can stop it anymore. For over 80 days, the balcony of Buckingham Palace remained a haunting void, a cold, architectural reminder of who was missing. While the public was fed a steady diet of planned and successful surgery and privacy for recovery, a far darker story was being written behind the polished mahogany gates. In the ruthless theater of the British monarchy, silence is never accidental. It is a weapon used to control the narrative, a shield to hide institutional panic, and eventually, it becomes a cage that traps the truth. William's update didn't just break that silence. It shattered the illusion of palace control. When he spoke of the shaking ground, he was finally admitting that the palace machine had reached its breaking point. They didn't just manage the optics. They tried to manufacture a reality where everything was fine, even as the center of their world was collapsing. You don't keep canceling a future queen's schedule for nothing. You don't let the most photographed woman in the world vanish from every lens for months unless the truth is too terrifying to show. This wasn't just about cancer. It was about who gets to own the story when the mask finally slips. The palace used privacy as a latch-on, a shield, for their own inability to handle human frailty. But in a public institution funded by the people, absolute silence is a commodity that comes with a devastating price. Every time the public asked a basic question, the gates closed tighter, fueling conspiracy and doubt. They sold the image of a perfect family but hid a medical battlefield until the last possible second. This wasn't transparency. It was truth dragged out at the last possible moment because the whispers had become a roar they could no longer ignore. Observe the faces of the courtiers now. The exhaustion etched into their expressions isn't just from work. It's from the weight of the secrets they were ordered to guard. They saw the medical teams arriving under the cover of night. They heard the hushed tones of specialists ushered into private suites, while the world was told she was resting. This privacy narrative wasn't designed to protect Kate's dignity. It was a desperate delay tactic for a system that doesn't know how to admit its own mortality. The monarchy manages perception. That is its primary function. And that is exactly where this crisis began. If you think this was just a health update, you're missing the entire story. This was the night the palace blinked. It was the moment the ancient institution had to admit that even the crown can bleed. The silence had a cost, and tonight, Prince William finally paid it in full. As the official silence deepened, the internal structure of the palace began to crack under the pressure of a reality they could no longer contain. Behind the closed doors of Clarence House in Kensington, a fierce and desperate battle was unfolding, not just against illness, but against the very machine designed to protect the crown. While the world was being fed a narrative of planned recovery, the whispers from inside the medical wing were becoming impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a communication breakdown. It was a systemic failure of an institution more afraid of the truth than of a scandal. The tension reached a boiling point when reports began to surface of an email that sent shockwaves through the royal staff, with a subject line that reportedly read, "She deserves more than silence." This wasn't an external leak. It was a cry of conscience from within the inner circle. The staff, who witnessed the true toll the illness was taking on Kate, were no longer willing to play the game of pretense. They saw the future queen's chair remain empty not because of a choice for privacy, but because the struggle for her survival had taken a turn that terrified even the most seasoned courtiers. Internal conflicts erupted between Prince William and his senior advisors. William, a man driven by a fierce, almost primal need to protect his wife, stood at odds with a palace machine that prioritized optics first. The advisors wanted to maintain the mask of invincibility, while the reality at Kate's bedside demanded honesty. You don't lose sight of a princess for months by accident. You do it because the truth is so heavy it threatens to sink the entire ship. The leak from the London clinic was the final blow to the palace's wall of secrecy. When rumors of unauthorized access to medical records hit the headlines, the privacy shield was permanently shattered. It became clear that if the palace didn't speak, the shadows would. King Charles, himself battling his own mortality, reportedly slammed his hand on the table and declared, "No more hiding." He saw what was happening behind those gates. A family breaking apart and a public trust eroding, and realized that the crown could not survive another decade of silence. This was the moment the mask didn't just slip. It was torn off. The everything is fine narrative was revealed to be a fragile house of cards in a storm. Tonight, we realized that the greatest threat to the monarchy wasn't the illness itself, but the layers of secrecy used to manage it. As the gears of the palace machine ground to a halt, the world began to understand. When a king has to overrule his entire court just to tell the truth, the crisis is far deeper than anyone dared to imagine. There is a moment in every fragile institution where the fear of truth is finally outweighed by the terror of a complete collapse. For the British monarchy, that moment happened in a private room where King Charles III, himself a man living under the shadow of his own diagnosis, looked at his heir and realized the palace machine was failing them both. The man who had spent 70 years adhering to protocol, a man who lived and breathed royal tradition, finally reached his breaking point. He saw a daughter-in-law he adored fighting for her life and a public trust that was disintegrating into a sea of conspiracy. Charles's reported command, "No more hiding," was not just a change in PR strategy. It was a structural pivot. He understood that the monarchy doesn't just manage feelings. It manages perception, and at that moment the perception was one of cold, calculated evasion. By choosing to overrule his court of advisors, the king admitted that the everything is fine narrative was a lie that was suffocating the family. This was a king choosing the human being over the institution, a rare and devastating move in a system that usually demands the exact opposite. The king's decision was driven by a terrifying reality he witnessed at Kate's bedside, a reality that terrified him more than any headline or bad press. He saw that the silence wasn't protecting her. It was isolating her. In an ancient institution that relies on being seen to be believed, the disappearance of Princess Kate had become a test case for survival. If the crown could not be honest about the health of its most beloved star, how could it be trusted with anything else? This intervention was the night the palace dropped its guard. Charles broke the gears of a machine that had been running on pretense for centuries. He realized that you don't fix a cracked house by hanging more beautiful paintings on the walls. You have to look directly at the cracks. By ordering the truth to be told, he was dragging the monarchy into the 21st century, forcing it to admit that even those who wear the crown are mortal. The result was a total reset of the royal script. It was no longer about optics first. It was about honesty at any cost. When the king chose Kate over the palace machine, he wasn't just saving a princess's dignity. He was attempting to save the monarchy's soul. But as the gates were set to open, the question remained: would the public forgive the months of calculated silence that came before? When the lens finally focused on Princess Kate, sitting alone on a wooden bench against a backdrop of spring blossoms, the world didn't just see a royal statement. They saw the total defeat of the palace's communication strategy. In those 94 seconds, Kate gave the public what the cold palace machine never could: honest, raw vulnerability. It was a moment that redefined the relationship between the crown and the people, proving that in the modern age, a princess's tears carry more authority than a king's decree. This video message was the ultimate pushback against the months of forced secrecy. By choosing to speak directly to the camera, without a spokesperson, without a polished press release, Kate effectively bypassed the courtiers who had spent months managing the optics of her absence. She framed her illness not as a state secret, but as a human struggle, asking for the very thing the palace had been using as a shield: time, space, and privacy. But this time, the request was rooted in human necessity, not institutional control. The contrast was staggering. On one side was the cold palace machine that had issued vague updates and distributed altered photographs. On the other was a woman, visibly fragile yet remarkably brave, speaking the word cancer out loud to a billion people. Kate didn't just update her medical chart. She rewrote the monarchy's entire script. She proved that the only way to survive the 21st century is to admit that behind the titles and the rituals, the crown is composed of flesh and blood that can suffer and bleed. Her body language told a story that the words alone couldn't convey. The slight tremor in her hands and the paleness of her complexion were the final pieces of evidence that the palace had been hiding how close they came to losing the emotional center of the monarchy. This wasn't transparency by choice. It was truth dragged out because the silence had become a poison. Kate's vulnerability was a weapon used to kill the conspiracy theories that the palace's own secrecy had birthed. Tonight, we look back at those 94 seconds and realize it was the moment the fairy tale monarchy died and a more human institution was born. Kate's legacy will not be defined by the jewels she wore or the ceremonies she attended, but by the moment she chose to be a human being first and a princess second. She showed that while the palace manages perception, she is the one who manages the heart of the nation. The announcement that Princess Kate had reached the milestone of being cancer-free or in remission brought a collective sigh of relief to a world that had clung to her journey like a lifeline. But beneath the celebratory headlines, a far more complex reality was settling over the halls of Kensington Palace. In the cold language of oncology and institutional planning, remission is not synonymous with a cure. It is a delicate state of truce. For the British monarchy, this means they are now forced to plan for a future defined by uncertainty rather than the absolute permanence they once projected. This update was once again a departure from the polished palace lines of the past. It was an admission that while the immediate storm had passed, the landscape of the Vong Tru had been permanently altered. The palace had to accept that the woman who holds the emotional center of the monarchy might never return to the relentless business as usual of the old days. Every decision, every tour, and every royal appearance now carries a silent, hovering question: what if it comes back? The announcement of remission didn't just update Kate's medical chart. It reset the monarchy's operational script. Prince William and the senior courtiers have had to develop new protocols and contingency plans for a future queen who may need to step away to survive at any given moment. This is a monarchy forced to admit it is mortal, a system that can no longer pretend that health is an optional background noise to the duty of the crown. Observe the tone of this latest update. It was a mix of joy and a heavy, lingering caution. The palace is no longer trying to control reality. They are now trying to survive it. Kate's journey into remission has become a test case for institutional empathy, a moment where a house built on rigid protocol had to bend to the reality of human recovery. They have moved from regret over her absence to a profound awareness that the human being at the center of the institution must be preserved at all costs. Tonight, as the lights dim over the palace, the sense of victory is quiet and fragile. The fairy tale monarchy, where nothing ever breaks, has been replaced by a system that has finally admitted it can bleed. Kate's remission is a victory, yes, but it is also a reminder of the price paid during the months of silence. A price measured in public trust and the realization that the future of the crown is now as vulnerable as the people it serves. The Kate crisis has done what centuries of political upheaval could not. It has forced the British monarchy to admit its own mortality. For generations, the crown operated on a myth of invincibility, a belief that the institution was a perpetual motion machine that never stopped, never broke, and certainly never bled. But as Princess Kate fought her battle in the shadows, that myth of the fairy tale monarchy finally crumbled. The palace has been forced to undergo a profound institutional shift, moving from the cold management of optics to the messy reality of human vulnerability. This shift is visible in the new protocols and contingency plans being drafted behind closed doors. In the old days, a royal illness was a state secret, managed with Victorian silence and a stiff upper lip. Today, the palace is being forced to accept that health is not an optional background noise, but a central factor in the survival of the institution. They are now planning for a future where a senior royal and a future queen might have to step away from public life not out of choice but to survive. This is no longer about managing feelings. It is about the political consequences of an ancient system facing the limits of the human body. The everything is fine narrative has been replaced by a cautious, fragile honesty. By allowing the world to see the cost of the struggle, the monarchy has transitioned from being an untouchable symbol to a human test case. They have had to learn that you cannot fix a cracked foundation by simply hanging more beautiful paintings on the walls. To survive in the 21st century, the institution has been forced to look directly at its own cracks, at the leaks, the fights, and the failure of its own secrecy. This transformation is Kate's true legacy. She didn't just update her medical chart. She rewrote the rules of the palace machine. She forced an ancient institution to acknowledge that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a requirement for modern trust. The palace has had to admit that the woman who holds the emotional center of the monarchy is a person first and a princess second. As the gears of the institution begin to turn again, they do so with a new, somber awareness. The crown is only as strong as the human beings who wear it. If there was ever a doubt about who truly holds the structural integrity of the House of Windsor together, the crisis of the past months has provided a definitive, chilling answer. Princess Kate is no longer just a member of the royal family. She has emerged as the indispensable anchor upon which the entire future of the monarchy rests. During her absence, the institution didn't just feel quiet. It felt hollow. This realization has sent a seismic shock through the palace walls, forcing a re-evaluation of power that no one, not even the king, could have predicted. The palace machine, in its cold and calculated wisdom, once viewed Kate as a supporting asset to the bloodline. But as the months of her silence dragged on, they watched the public's trust evaporate and the institution's relevance flicker. They discovered a terrifying truth. Without Kate, the monarchy loses its human face. She is the bridge between an ancient, often distant institution and a modern world that demands relatability. Her struggle has transformed her from a fashion icon and a dutiful wife into a symbol of resilience that transcends the crown itself. This ascension through adversity has changed the power dynamics within Kensington Palace. Prince William's fierce protection of her wasn't just a husband's love. It was a strategic recognition that the survival of his own future reign depends entirely on her well-being. The Kate effect is no longer about the clothes she sells out in minutes. It is about the emotional stability she provides to a nation. The palace has had to admit that if Kate fails, the system fails. This is a heavy burden for one woman to carry, yet it is the reality of the 21st century monarchy. Observe the subtle shift in how the courtiers now speak of her. There is a new tone of reverence, bordering on desperation. They understand that the business of being royal cannot proceed without its most vital star. The contingency plans now revolve around her health, her comfort, and her pace. The monarchy has been forced to decentralize its power from the traditional throne and move it toward the heart, and Kate is that heart. Tonight, we realize that the greatest secret the palace tried to hide wasn't just her illness, but her absolute power. They were terrified of the world knowing how much they rely on her. But the mask has been dropped. Kate's recovery isn't just a personal victory. It is a stay of execution for an institution that stared into the abyss of its own irrelevance and realized that without her, there is no path forward. In the cold, echoing chambers of British history, names are rarely just names. They are echoes of past failures and future promises. As the world watched Princess Kate's struggle, a phantom presence began to loom over the palace. The shadow of Diana, the Princess of Wales. For the first time in 30 years, the monarchy found itself in a terrifyingly familiar position, facing the potential loss of its most humanizing spirit. But this time, the palace machine could not afford to fail. This crisis became the ultimate test of whether the institution had learned anything from the tragedy that almost destroyed it in 1997. The Diana parallel was not just a media invention. It was an institutional haunting. The courtiers saw the same signs of public protectiveness, the same visceral reaction to a princess in pain, and the same simmering rage toward a cold establishment. William, more than anyone, felt this weight. His fierce, almost aggressive stance on privacy was not just about Kate. It was a scorched earth policy to ensure history did not repeat itself. He was not just protecting his wife. He was preventing the crown from making the same fatal mistake of choosing protocol over a person's soul. This wasn't a PR strategy, it was an act of survival for the heir to the throne. The palace's eventual transparency, the 94-second confession, was the emotional interest paid on a debt decades old. By allowing Kate to speak her truth, the monarchy finally broke the Victorian silence that had once isolated Diana. They realized that in the age of the internet, you cannot bury a princess in secrecy without burying the institution along with her. This was the moment the crown admitted that the princess of the people is not a title you bestow, but a role earned through shared vulnerability. Observe the global reaction. It wasn't just about a health update. It was about a collective relief that this time, the system didn't break her. The outpouring of support from every corner of the globe proved that Kate has inherited Diana's unique ability to bypass the gilded gates and speak directly to the hearts of millions. She has become the bridge that Diana was, but with one crucial difference. She has the full, albeit hard-won, protection of the king and the future king. Tonight, the ghost of Diana can finally rest. The House of Windsor has proven it can learn, even if it takes a life-threatening crisis to force that lesson. By prioritizing Kate's humanity, they have begun to heal the deepest wound in their modern history. The crown has realized that its greatest asset isn't its jewels or its land, but the people who make the public care about the name Windsor. In saving Kate, they may have finally saved themselves from the shadows of their own past. The long, agonizing winter of Kensington Palace has finally given way to a spring that feels earned, not just given. As we reach the conclusion of this heart-wrenching update, the image of Prince William and Princess Kate is no longer one of a distant, untouchable fairy tale, but of a resilient partnership that has survived the ultimate test of modern power. By choosing to dismantle the palace machine and speak the truth, they haven't just saved a reputation. They have restored the very integrity of the British monarchy. The crown, once obscured by a thick fog of calculated secrecy, now shines with a light that is far more authentic because it has been tested by fire. This crisis was never just about a medical diagnosis. It was a battle for the soul of an institution. The 150 days of silence, the internal warfare, and the eventual 94-second confession served as a monumental reset. The palace has learned, through pain and public outcry, that in the 21st century, transparency is not a threat to power. It is the only source of it. William's decision to place Kate's humanity above Victorian protocol has rewritten the royal code for generations to come. They have proven that the monarchy can be a human institution, capable of bleeding, capable of crying, and most importantly, capable of being honest with the people it serves. Kate's recovery is more than a medical milestone. It is a cultural victory. She has transitioned from the jewel of the crown to the anchor of the nation. Her journey has taught a global audience that vulnerability is not a weakness to be hidden, but a bridge to be crossed. The emotional debt to Diana has been acknowledged. The internal leaks have been silenced by truth, and the future king and queen now stand on a foundation of genuine trust rather than manufactured optics. As the sun sets over London, the message is clear. The monarchy survived because it dared to look at its own cracks. It survived because it chose love over legacy and truth over tradition. Kate's presence, fragile yet resolute, is the ultimate reminder that even under the heaviest crown, there is a human heart that must be protected at all costs. The tragic announcement that began this journey has ended in a historic transformation. The House of Windsor has found its voice again, and for the first time in a long time, the world is actually listening. Thank you for walking with us through this deep analysis of power, secrecy, and the future of the crown. The shadows have been pulled into the light, and the truth has finally set the monarchy free.